I want to talk with you about where you see the role of AI and in the operations space in organizations, how we can leverage it effectively, what guardrails we might need to put around it. But before we do that, could you tell the viewers who is Ewen and what's your background and what roles have you done?
Absolutely. So in the last few years, I've had a bit of a whirlwind of different roles. I started out at NAB as a junior intern nearly 10 years ago at this point. From there, I was brought into a team that wasn't yet ready to make the jump to cloud. We were very much an on-prem team. So for me, this presented an incredibly exciting opportunity. I seem to have picked the very perfect time to graduate from university and move into this space, because at the time we were starting to get people whispering about, oh, we could move this to public cloud, we can start taking advantage of these concepts. At the time, I was incredibly lucky to work with 3 or 4 very senior engineers at NAB who were very passionate about trying to improve these processes at the time where we were still having to spend lunch breaks and evenings creating these deployments at a time when other companies had started moving to this whole pattern of automation where we were recognizing that this wasn't valuable. So from there, we spent probably 3 or 4 years starting to move our workloads into AWS and working out how to secure them and how to make sure our customers' data was protected there, but also how to make our colleagues' lives easier at the time. From there, we ended up spending a lot of time focusing on what you might call developer experience in building out these platforms designed to make our colleagues who actually write the business logic and make the money for our companies make their lives easier. And this sort of pivoted us to thinking about how do we then start bringing the next generation of that talent in. For the legacy organizations at the time, there was that big focus on mentoring where it was available, but in some areas that was lacking. We weren't a big fancy technology company at the time. The thinking of every company as a technology company hadn't quite arrived. So we were pushing very hard to start building out things like broader internship programs and mentoring younger staff, not only in technology, but in ways of thinking.
What I'm hearing you sort of say is the environments you've been are fairly large,
Yes.
fairly complex, fairly mission critical environments, which are underpinned in many ways by the resiliency of their infrastructure environments.
Exactly.
So any failings, as we've seen in Australia in the last couple of months, can have disastrous consequences.
Absolutely.
And yet one feels with the potential of AI, you're surrendering to some machine. How can we have confidence that we can leverage this to make our lives more simple, but also be in control?
Absolutely. That's where I see the tremendous value in AI, in that bringing along of new employees, in that sort of helping them to immediately contribute, particularly to avoid this situation where you've got particularly younger people looking at it and worrying, what if I make the wrong decision? I see the rise of AI in terms of decision making to be a potential pitfall. But at the side of that, I've seen certain groups looking at AI to actually break down problems in a way that can be understood by potentially junior or less skilled employees to drive incredible value, both in their training and in terms of what they can do with that information.
You can give me an example of where you might see that.
I can. We've got a few vendors at the moment who are very passionate in this space, particularly in our security area, where we're looking at the rise of particularly security-oriented problem-solving AIs. We won't go into any specific companies, but I think 2 of them at the moment are very focused on the idea of a security AI to take an incident coming through and start breaking it down in terms of here's where it originated, here's the systems it affects, here's the path that this usually takes in order to lead from a vulnerability to an active exploitation.
Yeah.
Breaking it down in terms of these are the customer items in your database that seem to follow this pattern that you should follow up on, and here's a list of actions you could potentially take, and all of that coming through instantly as part of that initial triage process. It's no longer a case of engineers having to sort through logs in a log aggregator and going through databases to look for potential login events. Having an AI that is automated, having a computer that's unfeeling and unthinking in a way, looking for these patterns, I feel represents tremendous value to pivot into leaving then a human to actually make the decision on what action to take.
Well, I'm interested there because that human doesn't have to be 20, 30, 40 years experience. If you've got all the sort of analysis presented to you, you can reach a conclusion more straightforwardly.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that humans are particularly good at, is actually understanding the context, both at an organizational level and almost at a level of feelings. Does it feel like this is something that you need to take immediate action on? Is this something to be escalated? And that's something that we can train people very effectively. This idea of interpersonal coaching effectively from seniors to juniors, cool, you could spend 10 weeks going through rote issues of this is how you find a user and this is how you do X, Y, and Z. But really, I think the value is in coaching them on, once you've found X, Y, and Z, here's the process for making a decision on that. Here's how we can follow our organisation's processes in order to lead to an outcome. And critically, here's how we can justify that as far as any review that might come down the line.
And I'm hearing there, Ewen, you're talking about AI not in the sense of automated decision making. You're using about augmenting the analysis that somebody does by simplifying that task. So speed of response is quicker because of that.
Absolutely, and it's something that I'm particularly passionate about in terms of the readiness of AI to make those decisions. There's a massive world of technology. It's changing at a rate of knots at the moment. I'm not sure anyone could ever stay on top of it fully, but I'm still very much of the opinion that AI is not yet at a point where we could or should trust it on its own to make these decisions. The way I see it, there's probably a couple of phases for us to go to before we get there. Whereas at the moment I see it being incredibly valuable in terms of AI supporting a human decision maker, whereas many in the industry and many in the broader technology space would love to eventually see it getting to the point of the human assisting AI and eventually the AI assisting itself effectively, having different, more specialised artificial intelligence is looking at things like, cool, we've got our security focus, we've got our customer focus. All of these could eventually be automated systems. But for now, I see the value in those systems supporting a human decision maker to evaluate.
Well, and you also said at the roundtable you attended that I hosted a couple of weeks ago, this delightful prospect that we might deploy AI to scrutinise AI. So I thought that was a nice point of view. So it's not that we've got a way of using AI to double check the things that we do.
Absolutely, and it's a fascinating use case to me. We've seen a lot of the jailbreaks of AI, the exploitation of making it do things you don't intentionally want it to do, have been around phrasing and around what you want out of it. And the way I see it, using an AI to scrutinise another AI rephrases the problem. It's not a make a decision on this, it's evaluate this text or evaluate this outcome against another set of criteria. To me, it minimises the black and white nature of some of it down to a more nuanced, this looks like something that needs further scrutiny from an AI looking at another AI. It basically says, this system made this decision, do you agree with it at a certain level? Or from the perspective of security, did the steps look right? It gives it leeway to contribute without, if you want, allowing it to hallucinate an answer to some of those questions. It sort of restructures the problem in a way that I think is more conducive to at least our current implementations of some of these, particularly the large language models, the way they produce some of these outputs. I've seen even one or two words in a question result in a completely different output, and it seems to me like when you give it room to, I guess you will imagine a course of action, it tends to get, if not confused, it tends to sort of do its own thing. Whereas when you can phrase it in terms of a very narrow, do you agree with this, or is this correct against these criteria, you tend to find that you can narrow its focus a bit, and looking at it in terms of a set of stages, I feel gives us the best opportunity both to get a useful output out of it, but to catch problems along the way if all of a sudden you start seeing deviation in one of those stages.
Ewen, I've got a final question. All of this entails change, and change is always comes up against the human condition of threatened by the change. My observation of a lot of people in operations is their technical competence is part of their sense of self-worth, their ability to solve problems. How do you get that marriage between people who feel their worth is solving problems to realise that actually having assistance is going to help them?
To me, this is the meat of the problem. I now spend a lot of my time, both in my previous roles and my current role, looking at how we can drive effectiveness in engineering. And to me, that is ultimately a value proposition. A lot of the engineers that I speak with who may be threatened by even the more basic kinds of AI, your more traditional DevOps and automation approaches, the way they see their jobs is very linearly defined to I come in, I click buttons, I make a decision, that is my role. Whereas the answer that we've been trying to arrive at all of the organisations that I've worked with is trying to define, but what is the value that you are adding as an engineer. And to me, it's not necessarily the decisions, it's the ideas that the company is acting on. It's ultimately the products that we build for our customers, and that those products are safe to use and secure. And to me, the way AI can really help in these areas is by making the value proposition of the engineer greater rather than lesser. To me, the value is in the understanding of being a human, almost, in terms of making those decisions that a computer will not necessarily ever reach. Whereas the engineers that are threatened by this are looking at it in, oh, they're going to take away my ability to make those decisions. Whereas my argument is, no, it's going to enrich the data with which you can make a decision.
Yeah.
In some ways, there may be groups who are doing pure data entry. In some ways, yes, there is probably a threat to those areas, but again, I see the value being a transition from data entry to decision making at the point of entry. If the AI has, processed it and formatted in such a way that you can now key it in, the decision is this valuable? Is our customer better served at another point in our organization, another process, another product? Transitioning the people who are maybe doing more low-grade jobs, allowing them to actually upskill in that space and apply a higher level thinking. And to me, this means that no longer do you necessarily need a hard floor of saying, oh, everyone in so-and-so role or above needs a degree or some other form of qualification. It now allows us to focus on saying, when we have the support of a system that is rated for doing this, the decision making is not necessarily something that we're teaching, it's something that's learned over a career regardless of background. So we can start looking at actually bringing not just engineers, but business users, customer support users, all empowered to actually make these decisions with the support of artificial intelligence systems. So to me, the question is not, oh, is it going to cost me my job? It's, is this going to allow me to do a higher order job? That ultimately is where the value is for me, and that's what I'm most excited about in seeing these systems come to fruition.